All right. Hi, everybody. This is Kyle from SitReps to Steercodes. And we're going to have a resume video here where we're going to talk about how to translate military skills and experiences into a civilian resume format that makes sense. I've got two guests with me, so they can go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hey guys, it's Strobes from Fighter Jet Cockpit.
All right.
Hey, I'm Alec, former naval officer, Wharton MBA.
Yeah, and Strobes, where did you go to school? I believe it's the illustrious Harvard Business School, right?
Yeah, it's the Wharton of the North.
The Wharton of the North.
Yeah.
Okay. And you now work as a consultant, and we've had you on as an AMA guest as well on SitReps. So these
Yep,
are
that's great, and thanks for having me on again.
yeah, no, and I really happy to do this, right? I think that we'll get some real value out of this. So the kind of point of this resume video is what we're going to do is we're going to walk through some of Strobe's experience as an F-18 pilot and try to translate some of his basically bullets that he would have had in his military experience over into something that you would actually try to put onto a civilian resume. Now, are these bullet points that you would have on like your what do they call it, a fit rep for the Navy, or what where would these bullet points have come from?
So basically, when I was transitioning, I chopped up my career into tours of duty, and then for each of those tours of duty, I grabbed all my fitness reports. And so from those fitness reports, I took, all my jobs that I had while assigned to this squadron, which is VFA 211. I took all those jobs, and then I took all the quals that I had earned and just kind of listed them out. And so I took the bullet points from those fit reps and filled the bullet points on these.
Cool. So let's kind of walk through. So you told me before we started there's a difference between these, right? And I can kind of recognize them as an aviator myself, right? And so there's a difference between the ground jobs and the flying jobs, right?
Exactly. So right about the first four bullets are ground jobs, and then the last four are flight jobs. So I kind of took those first four jobs in chronological order. So my first job was PRAME branch officer. So I was working with 14 enlisted guys who are in charge of maintaining the ejection seats and all survival equipment. I did that job for probably 9 months, moved on to the public affairs, then moved on to ops admin. And then finally, my top tour was as aircraft division officer, where I led the 68 personnel across 5 different work centers. And that was kind of the big one that I wanted to highlight in my top job there right before I left in the squadron.
Yeah, so this would have been like, were these jobs kind of linked to like career progression, right? As, hey, you're a brand new pilot, right? And as you progressed in rank, right, this was the division officer was the one that kind of required, because what did you leave? Did you leave as an 03 or an 04?
03.
Yeah. Okay. So this would have been like your culminating 03 job, right?
Exactly. So coming in as an 02, you're starting off with a branch officer with 14 guys, and then public affairs, which isn't really that big of a deal, kind of a fluff job. And really everyone kind of gets that fluff job there second, because at that point you're working on your upgrades to be a section lead, and so most of your time is spent doing tactical work, so you're going to get those easy to do jobs there, kind of second one off.
Yeah. And that's a big difference between, I think, Army aviation officers, we're primarily rotate between leadership and staff roles, and our flying is almost kind of like the side job, right? Depending on what unit you're in and what the op tempo is. But and so these jobs down here are actual flying billets, right? So you were an NVG instructor. What was kind of like the progression here? I imagine it was NVG instructor first.
Well, yeah, that was kind of the first qual, and then NATOPS was the second qual. Division lead was the next one, and then combat section lead mission commander was kind of the biggest one there. So
Yeah.
Going kind of converging on those middle bullets there. So they were all just, of all the quals I earned, those are the most, I think, impactful that I wanted to highlight as well.
Okay. Now, so really the only sort of person that would really understand all of this, right, is probably a fellow pilot, a fellow naval aviator, right? And there
Exactly.
would you even have to say like, could really any naval aviator read this, right? Or would it have to be more of like a strike fighter pilot?
I think if you put a helo pilot to read this, they would get it and they would understand, especially the top part. Like any helo P3 pilot, anyone really
Yeah.
would look at that and go, okay, cool, I know what you did, because the squadrons in naval aviation are all organized fairly similarly.
Yeah.
The bottom stuff is more platform specific. So,
Yeah.
like a helicopter aircraft commander, that job, that equivalent responsibility doesn't have a parallel with us because we're a single piloted. So there's a lot of those quals that don't really translate, but the top stuff definitely does.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to highlight, right? Because you and I, both aviators are from different branches of service in different communities, right? And so for me to look at say bullet points from my military experience, right, I can kind of tell what career progression is for an Army aviator, right? But to look at this, right, it's a little like, I don't know, like, okay, so you were an NVG instructor, right? Like in say Army aviation, right, we don't, like, the instructor pilots are the ones that are going to kind of have all these quals, right, and get people progressed through the aircrew training program and get them qualified to the different qualification levels and readiness levels that we would expect a crew to have, or a pilot to have, right? But you'd never see like an O1 or an O2. I mean O2, right? Because you spend so long in flight school. You would never see an O2 in an Army aviation unit as an NVG instructor, unless they had. I mean, I don't even think that's like a billet, right? They would just be like an instructor pilot. But most commissioned officers are not instructor pilots. They're either platoon leader or company commander. They're working on staff, right? And so the point out of all of that is it can be hard. Like, say if you think you're applying to like a job or an MBA program, right? And there's veterans there, like you still have to do work on your resume to kind of translate it, right? Because there's like 30,000 different jobs in the military. And it's really hard for one military person to look at a resume and kind of determine like what all of it means, right? Because we speak in acronyms, our jobs can be very technically specific, right? Career progression can be very different. So it's important that you're able to take all this and kind of compress it, or translate it into a way that makes sense for the layman, right? Even if that person is, somebody who served in the military. So why don't you kind of talk us through like your thought process here, on how you took this and you converted it over into the right hand side, which would be what would actually go on your civilian resume.
Yeah. So a lot of the good advice I had gotten was, no one really cares about quals and specific things because you're not applying for a job that requires those. And so applying to, business school, no one cares that I was an NVG instructor. The most important part of that, for example, would be the instructor part, like you were teaching people. And so that was something that I had in the first draft. Same thing with the NATOPS instructor, right? That's kind of your check once a year while you're safe for flight. That was the qual there. So it was a very good qual to have, but again, a civilian is not going to necessarily understand the weight of that. So pulling out of those, the instructor part was important. And then for the second part is leadership. And that's what, business schools are looking for. So division lead, leading 4 aircraft and 8 personnel, still on the quals on the bottom there, that the leadership throughout is important. And then, pulling that from flight and into the ground stuff also was good. So you kind of also have to leverage, what is the public perception of the military and what's important. And so when I was building those first few bullets on the right, people are going to see fighter pilot and they're going to go, oh, Top Gun. And so you have to figure out, how do I both leverage that to convey what I want? And so the first few bullets the first one was about advanced flight leadership qualifications. So I was taking that division lead and that combat section lead and putting that in the bullet. And then I talked about the things what does that mean? What are the skill sets we have? Well, I can rapidly synthesize information and make critical decisions. That's something you would never see on a military fitness report, because everybody has those abilities in the military, and it's not something you highlight. But from the civilian perspective, that's what you want to highlight. You want to translate that thing that isn't written down about your military experience. The second one, tactical leader, weapons employment authority. Those convey weight. The way people understand weapons employment authority, even if they're a civilian, they know what that means, that is an important job.
and then, 2 aircraft and 4 aviators flying over hostile territory. You kind of have to not Hollywood it up, but you have to put it in a language that both sides understand, right? Everyone in the military, when they transition, doesn't want to write words like that because it's kind of cringeworthy.
Yeah.
So you have to find that balance where it's not cringy, but it also conveys what you're trying to communicate. And then finally, for the last bullet, just to keep on the leadership theme that I wanted to convey throughout all of those bullets, was what is the ground job? And I wanted to leave with the most impactful, which was 68 personnel with highly diverse backgrounds, maintaining during combat ops. And that was another thing that was important, because if you're in the military, people expect that you're leading personnel. And so I wanted to make sure that was in there. So being the public affairs officer wasn't really important. And also, I think another thing to remember is it's not like we just arrived at the bullet points on the right, those 3. It started off with turning the 8 bullet points on the left to 6 on the right, and then it turned it into 5 on the right, then 4, then 3. And as you make iterations on these, you boil it down to the most important things.
Yeah. So I think some important things to highlight that you said, first off, you stripped out pretty much all of the different positions and titles here. And I've had people ask me this. They're like, well, how do I layer this onto a resume that makes sense? And what you want to try to do is try to maybe get like one title like you have here, right? And you have 2008 to 2012, and you maybe want to categorize it in a way that has some large groupings and makes sense, right? So hey, we're going to cover a 4-year time period here, and this might cover like, hey, I was at like one specific base or one unit, or and so let me kind of try and take all those jobs and compress it into something that like is readable and makes sense, right? So we're going to talk about, hey, this is a 4-year time period. We're going to pick out maybe the most impactful or relevant title, essentially, and layer it on here, right? So like combat strike fighter pilot, right? If you're like, okay, any person who reads that is going to see the word fighter pilot, and they're going to think, okay, like you said, Top Gun. This person flew aircraft, he flew military aircraft, right? And then, like nobody's going to know, like lieutenant, they're not going to care, but like, it's a good way to kind of like, you got to have your rank on there, division leader and flight leader, right? So this immediately allows you to basically say like, yeah, so I was a combat strike fighter pilot. And in that role, I had, basically 2 different roles. And one is I was a division leader where and you can point towards, hey, I led people on the ground across 5 divisions doing maintenance, and I was also a flight leader, right? And that was where hey, I was a combat strike fighter pilot and a tactical leader, and and had weapons employment authority for 2 fighter aircraft. And that kind of like immediately like breaks it into people's minds. They're like, oh, okay, so this guy had 2 jobs, right? We really aren't getting to like the nitty gritty here, but like one of them was basically making sure the aircraft could fly, and the other one was actually flying the aircraft and employing weapon systems. And to somebody like that, they're going to say, okay, so like clearly this person is very qualified and mentally agile, right? Which is really what businesses and MBA programs want. They want people who are mentally agile, and can rapidly adapt and demonstrate a high level of performance, right? Because all MBA programs are going to have, they're for career switchers essentially, right? So it's almost kind of like not really relevant. I mean, it's relevant what you did beforehand, right? Because they want to make sure you're going to recruit well and have a high caliber, be a high caliber person while you're in the program, but it's not as relevant like exactly what you did. So you're trying to pull out those kind of like essential skills of like leadership, mentally agile, and show that to an MBA program and also to future employers, which I think you've done very nicely here. And this is much easier to explain than maybe trying to walk somebody through and be like, yeah, these 4 positions were, my fighter pilot positions, and these other positions were my like trying to explain to like a civilian person like what the difference is between like your ground duties and your flight duties. Like most people are not going to get that, right?
Yeah, your average person in college admissions isn't going to understand everything that's on the left side of the screen.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other things that, we talk about resumes and the application of business school, but the other important part that resumes play in the business school process is they're an anchor point during the interview. So if you get an interview, what the interviewer is going to have is they're going to have your resume, and they're going to be pointing at it on the table, and they're going to go, tell me about your job as a combat
strike fighter pilot.
Mhm.
And then you can go and tell stories about all the things on the left side of the screen. You can talk about, leadership and being a public affairs. You can steer the conversation where you want it. But you want to leave it vague enough so that those things are a anchor point for a lot of stories that are going to follow.
Yeah, because it'll be like, hey, tell me one time that you faced like a challenge, or you had to work cross functionally, or one time you succeeded, one time you failed. You'll get questions like that, and so because this is 2008 to 2012, right? And then you had also experiences after 2012, right? Because you got out. When did you get out? Like specifically, like 20.
I did B school in 2015.
Yeah, but you did B school in 2015, right? So um so you would have had like there would have been another block like basically below this, right?
Yeah, for my instructor tour, there'll be a separate, and it was the same exercise,
Yeah,
very similar.
yeah,
Going through the same process.
so like if somebody was like, walk me through your resume, and I'm like destroying this box here, but you would have like, so like what would the time period of that been?
That was 2012 through 2015.
Okay, yeah, so 2012 through 2015, and it would be above this, right? um And so basically, if somebody was like, walk me through your resume, you would have like a short blurb, below the combat strike fighter pilot one, that maybe was about, hey, I was in flight school as a, student officer in training, and kind of talk about maybe some of the things you did out of that. And then, okay, then I was a combat strike fighter pilot from 2008 to 2012. And then from 2012 to 2015, what was your job? You were an instructor.
Yeah, I was an instructor pilot on the Hornet.
Yeah, as an instructor pilot at a Hornet, and and you'd have like three other, so basically what you're doing is you're trying to take all these different, like the 40 different jobs you had while in the military, right? And compress them down into these major category and time periods. Because it's much easier to walk somebody through a resume, right? Because that's like the first question you're going to get. You're like, okay, walk me through your resume. And it's much easier to say, okay, I was a student, learning how to, fly aircraft, and I got selected for F-18 Hornets, their fighter attack aircraft. And then I was a combat strike fighter pilot from 2008 to 2012. And I did these things, right? These kind of like broad things, and here's the skills and like results that I have from them. And then from 2012 to 2015, I was an instructor pilot, at this place, right? Because that says Virginia Beach. I'm not sure where you did the instructor pilot time. And I did I did these kind of major accomplishments, right? And to civilian, they'll be like, okay, that like immediately makes more sense than you saying like, as a public affairs officer, and then I was an operations administration officer. Like they have like no idea what that means in any way, shape, or form.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know what that means. I mean, public affairs, I never did public affairs in the Army, right? So maybe like operations administration, I could that's because we have ops jobs in the Army as well. But that's like a much I can.
Something.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's I think one of the other benefits of when you're making that transition, finding other people who've gone before from your community, because I could help someone who is a Army Ranger, but I can't help them as well as someone who is an Army Ranger, telling them how to make their resume. And so, I think what you're trying to get here is, philosophically, how do we approach this problem, and what is our goal? And then you can go to people for specific help to say, how did you translate this? How did you write this out? Like, why did you do it this way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's important to really, to like you said, recognize that, even within the military community, it's not a one size fits all. For me to take like you and I were talking about this before we even started recording. You're like, oh, I don't even know how like Army aviation works with like different positions and stuff. So like, how could you take my resume and like, I mean, you could probably like kind of get me in like the ballpark, right? But to really, kind of get it somewhere that conveys in a meaningful way the sort of experiences that you had, you might need to talk to somebody from that community. And and what's important to know too is that even though like you're going to take all this experience, right, and you're going to put it on a resume, and then you're going to take and apply to B school or apply to your first job or whatever, what's going to end up happening is you're then going to start to build skills in your job, right? and it's going to take your military experience. Your military experience is honestly going to start to become irrelevant, because it doesn't assign you a market value in the human labor capital market in any way, shape, or form. As you start, like, say you're like working as a consultant, and like, okay, I was a senior associate, and then I was a manager, and I worked on these deals or these projects, right? That starts to signal to other people in the employment marketplace this sort of value, when monetary value that can be assigned to you, right? And your military experience is going to become more and more compressed at the bottom until you basically say, yeah, I was in the military for X number of years, and I was a fighter pilot. Like, and then I went to business school now as a consultant, and I worked on industrial deals, or I worked on industrial projects, or TMT projects or whatever, over span of 5 years, and progressively and it was a manager my third year, and then I was managing engagements, right? So that's like the sort of like way you'd walk somebody through a resume, right? As you kind of get more distance from that. So don't think that, like, at least from my perspective, right, don't think that this is going to be like a make or break thing for the rest of your life. Like, it's almost like you got to kind of like get enough momentum to just get over this, so you can then start to build some real civilian skills that are that people will actually be able to recognize.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I mean, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're selling at this point, you're selling your intangibles
Yeah.
before you start building up a list of tangibles that you're going to. I mean, if I were applying to be an airline pilot, my resume would not read like the side of the right of the side of the screen.
Mhm.
It would read very differently.
Yeah, you'd be like, I have X number of hours in both, doing this and instrument time, and I'm qualified to do like X, Y, and Z, right?
Yeah.
It would probably read more like that, because like to an airline, they'd be like, okay, like, is this guy qualified to like fly aircraft, right? Because they're going to have like job requirements that are, vastly different than, say, a consultant, or, somebody working in finance, right? And so you really do have to speak to that. And so, if the shoe fits, wear it, like, speak the language. But, in general, I think most corporate jobs, which is where most military officers, probably land, they're really looking for intangible here. They're looking for people who are mentally agile, who they can train, who've demonstrated leadership. I mean, right here where you say combat strike fighter pilot selected by the unit commander, selected is, I think, a really key word there, because they're like, okay, this guy was selected to do something. He demonstrated enough aptitude from his kind of like basic job to then be moved up, right, into somebody in the civilian world. That I think that immediately speaks to an intangible of, hey, this guy is motivated, this guy can demonstrate leadership, this guy can be counted on, and he's agile enough to be able to grow outside of his role, right? Which is really what people want to find. They want to find people who they can trust and take on projects within their organization, and grow them into the sort of leaders that they need in order for that business to be successful. So,
And there's a reason that some version of leading is mentioned 5 times in that small blurb, because you're wanting the person to remember that word.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, tactical leader, authority. That's a good one right there. Led 68 personnel, diverse backgrounds. Yeah, this, it makes a lot of sense. Alec, anything you'd like to add, or? Maybe
just jumping out on a few points here. So first off, this highlighting the fact that you're a combat strike fighter pilot up front is huge, right? Because as a resume reviewer, especially a civilian, goes down that just jumps out there. So you want your tagline to be something really, really cool, or really, really heavy hitting. So that's a great one. I mean, in my case, I was a sub officer, so I'd say something like nuclear submarine officer, or in charge of a multi-billion-dollar warship would be like one of my lead bullets there, something to that effect. But just talk about the authority you had, and the kind of weight of the responsibility. So first off, that's a great line there for combat strike fighter pilot. Second of all, with the how you order your bullets, they don't have to be in chronological order. You want your bullets to be your heaviest hitting bullets coming first, right? So if you look at
And
his first bullet here.
and Alec, when you say bullets, you mean these sub bullets here, right?
Yes,
Not
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, you don't have to just detail chronologically what you did, but you want to put your most impactful assignment and role up front, and then put other ones kind of in descending order below it. So I thought that was really good reading that here. So that immediately grabs your attention. And as Austin discussed, being selected by the unit commander for that leadership qualifications is huge. So yeah, that's the big thing. If you're writing your resume, people are going to be reviewing hundreds of resumes. Make sure like yours stands out and grabs their attention right off the bat. So lead strong. So that was kind of my big takeaway reading this.
Yeah, as somebody, I've done plenty of resume reviews as well, working for my past firm. And I'm sure I will with my current employer at some point when we decide to hire more people. And you get these resumes, right? And so you're going to get like basically like a PDF that's going to have like 30 or 40 different resumes in it, right? And they're going to say, hey, go through here and mark the ones that you like. And so you start going down them, right? And I've got other things to do during the day, right? I'm busy. I got, my work, this might have been before sit reps, right? So sit reps now kind of some portion of my work. But, you're going to say you're probably spend like, I don't know, like 10, 15 seconds on one resume. And you're going to look like, okay, name, university, right? One reason why MBA programs have you place your education at top. And then you're just going to like start looking through like the job description or through the job titles and see if anything jumps out at you, right? And for me, when I was always looking for military resumes, right? If I saw something like, okay, they went to West Point, they went to the Naval Academy, not to knock on, civilian institutions, right? They're perfectly fine. But those are always like, okay, now what jobs do they have? I'm like, okay, they were like an aviation guy, they were in Ranger Regiment, I'm like, okay, like I would just like mark the resume, be like, okay, well, this is clearly a person that we want to talk to further, right? Because like to me, I'm able to like immediately pull out those jobs, right? And know that those are kind of like selective jobs, right? If you and if say I saw like, okay, you're like an infantry officer, all right, let's take a look, let's take a little further look and kind of see how you structured this and explain it, right? And if it made sense, I'm like, okay, all right, well, we're going to mark that person. And like you just like that's, and it really only take you about 15 seconds, right? So like you're putting all this work into it, but really you got to find a way to communicate like the very broad strokes immediately, so somebody will pick it up as like a hook and basically like flag it for further review because eventually they're going to take these resumes and they want, okay, let's do a phone screen or something. And the very first question the person's going to ask is, okay, cool, why don't you walk me through your resume, right? Because like I've looked at your resume, but like I want to hear it from your perspective. And also I probably haven't looked at it that intensely either, so it's important to really kind of get that like initial communication right, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if you throw a bunch of acronyms in there and a bunch of quals, and your list looks like a merit badge resume with all these little buttons on it, like it's just, did this person even bother? Do they know what they're getting into? Do they know that none of this matters? And so it also can really hurt you if you don't do it the right way.
Yeah, you don't want to have like, you don't want to like hang your hat on things that are not important, right? That's probably, I think, the takeaway there is you're trying to communicate, hey, here's like the major things I've done, here's the major skills I have on them, but like don't like hang your hat on like the fact that you went to like Ranger school or SEER school, or that you have like an RCOM, or like I don't know, if you have like a Medal of Honor, or something with like a Valor device. I think that might be worth highlighting somewhere, but yeah, definitely try to focus and communicate very clearly like the major things you did. Okay, well, cool. I think that kind of like wraps up what we were trying to accomplish here. So, Strobes or Alec, do you got anything else you would you'd like to add here, or this is going to be the first of a series of resume videos. So this would kind of be like the first one we're going to do.
No, like you guys did a great job. Nothing else to add.
Cool.
Yeah, nothing for me. That was great.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, hey, everybody, thank you for listening. Go ahead. It's really helpful if, you hit like or share this, right?